The first time I saw a stranger in our yard, I was 12 years old and still believed that a locked back door could protect you from anything. Before my family moved south, we lived outside a small town in northern Georgia. Our house sat on 2 acres, with thick woods pressed against 3 sides of the property. To a kid, it was perfect. There was a rusted trampoline by the tree line, an above-ground pool, a detached garage, and enough open grass for every game we could invent. Whenever my friends wanted to play football, hide-and-seek, or manhunt, they came to my house. One Friday near the end of summer, 4 of us decided to camp in the backyard. There was me, my best friend Owen, my cousin Nate, and a quiet kid from school named Marcus. Our parents approved because the tents would be less than 20 yards from the house. My dad even helped us carry out sleeping bags, lanterns, and a cooler full of soda. We spent the evening playing soccer until the grass was wet under our shoes. After pizza, we set up the tents before the sun disappeared behind the woods. My parents left the patio lights on, and their yellow glow made the yard feel safe. By then, we were more excited about playing manhunt than sleeping. Owen and I hid first. Nate and Marcus counted at the back door, which was our home base. I crawled beneath the trampoline because the tall weeds around it concealed me almost completely. From there, I could see the dark yard in pieces, the pool ladder, the garage, the pale steam coming off the hot tub. When the whistle sounded, I waited. Nate and Marcus moved across the grass, calling out fake clues to make us reveal ourselves. I watched until both of them turned away, then slipped from beneath the trampoline and ran low toward the hot tub. I made it behind the wooden paneling and crouched there, preparing to sprint for the door. That was when something slammed against the trash bins beside the house. One of the motion lights snapped on. Its beam did not reach the hot tub, but I could see the narrow side yard clearly. A tall man in a dark jacket was walking away from the bins. He moved quickly, but not like someone who belonged there. His head stayed lowered, his hands were hidden in his pockets. He crossed the end of the driveway and vanished into the woods. I ran to my friends so fast that I nearly fell. At first, they thought I was trying to trick them. Then, they saw my face. We called off the game and went inside to tell my dad. He searched the edge of the property with a flashlight. He checked behind the garage, along the road, and near the trees where I had seen the man disappear. Nothing. He told us we would sleep inside, and none of us argued. For a while, we played video games in the living room and tried to make jokes about it. The fear faded just enough for us to make a bad decision. The tents were already outside. We were 12, stubborn, and embarrassed to admit we were scared. Eventually, we carried our sleeping bags back into the yard. Owen and I shared one tent. Nate and Marcus took the other. We talked across the darkness until our voices grew quieter. The insects hummed. Somewhere in the woods, a branch cracked. I was still awake when I heard footsteps in the grass. They came closer, slowly, stopping beside our tent. Then the zipper began to move. At first I thought it was my father checking on us. The flap opened just enough for a face to lean inside. In the dim light, I saw a man with gray stubble and deep shadows beneath his eyes. He whispered, "Keep it down." It was not my father. I screamed hard enough to hurt my throat. Owen woke beside me and started yelling too. The man reached in, caught my ankle, and squeezed. I kicked wildly. Across the yard, the other tent erupted with shouting. The stranger released me and ran. My dad burst through the back door before we reached the house. He ran through the yard yelling for the man to show himself. My mother called the police. Officers took our statements, walked the property, and found nothing except a muddy shoe print near the side gate. That was all they had. My father slept on the couch with the blinds open until daylight. The next morning, he walked every one of us home himself, even though our houses were only a few blocks away. No one wanted to mention the tent again. We folded it in silence and put it in the garage, where it stayed untouched for years. For years, I told myself it was just one terrible night. I did not understand then that fear can wait quietly inside you, ready to wake up the moment a familiar shadow crosses your path. 7 years later, I worked in risk management for a bank in Manhattan. It was not a job that made me feel brave, but it made me good at noticing patterns, people who talked too much, stories that did not fit, small warnings everyone else ignored because it was easier. That was how I first noticed Damien Vale. He had transferred into our office in the spring. Damien was charming in the polished, exhausting way some people are. At happy hour, he always had a story about a celebrity he had met, a business deal that almost made him rich, or a woman who supposedly could not stop calling him. Everybody liked him at first because he was funny. I liked him too, until I began to notice that every story grew bigger every time he told it. Still, he was easy to be around. When he invited me and my younger brother Eli to spend a weekend at his family's coastal house in Maine, I said yes. He said his sister Rowan would be there and that their mother kept the place stocked with food, kayaks, and enough rooms for everyone. The house was not really a beach house. It stood alone above a rocky cove, surrounded by evergreens and an abandoned service road. The nearest occupied home was far enough away that you could not see its lights at night. Behind the house, the ground dropped sharply toward the ocean. Rowan met us at the airport. She was polite but distant, as though she had already decided we would be a problem. Damien acted normal during the drive, but by the time we reached the house, he had started drinking from a bottle he pulled from his bag. That evening, we walked to a small waterfront bar. Damien drank too fast. He hit on women who clearly wanted nothing to do with him, argued with a bartender about a tab, and nearly started a fight with a man whose girlfriend he would not leave alone. Eli and I finally pulled him outside before it became worse. On the way back, we saw someone on the service road. The man wore a heavy hooded coat even though the night was mild. He was walking toward us with his shoulders hunched and his face hidden. I noticed the smell before I saw him clearly. It was sour and rotten, like wet animal fur mixed with old meat. Eli slowed down. "Do you smell that?" Damien laughed as if it were funny, but he was watching the man too closely. We stepped to the side of the road to let him pass. The stranger never looked at us. He kept walking, dragging one foot slightly behind the other. We waited until he was several yards away before breathing normally again. Then Rowan looked back. "He turned around," she said. The man was following us. At first, we walked faster. Then he did. We began to jog. He began to jog. I looked over my shoulder and saw a glint near his hand. It might have been a folding knife. It might have been a piece of metal. I never found out, because the second we broke into a run, he did too. We sprinted all the way to the house. The man stopped near the bend in the road, just beyond the reach of the porch light. He did not chase us to the door. He simply stood there, still as a fence post, until we slammed it shut. We should have called the police right then. Instead, Damien said we were overreacting. He locked the door, poured himself another drink, and began pacing through the living room. A few hours later, his mood changed again. He became cheerful, almost giddy, and asked if we wanted to go back out. Nobody answered him. Eli and I went to our room. We did not sleep much. We sat with the lamp on, pretending to scroll through our phones while listening to the house settle around us. Waves hit the rocks below the cliff in slow, heavy bursts. A branch scraped against the siding over and over, and each time it sounded like fingernails moving across the wall. Around midnight, footsteps crossed the wooden floor outside our door. They stopped directly on the other side. Neither of us spoke. The footsteps did not move for a long time. Then we heard Damien laughing softly in the hallway. He was talking to someone, but Rowan was downstairs in her room. There was no one else in the house. I moved close to the door and listened. Damien's voice was low, playful, almost affectionate. "You see," he said, "they always think I'm the problem." Then he laughed again. Eli was lying rigidly on the bed beside me. He had heard it too. Neither of us wanted to open the door because either answer was bad. Damien was either talking to someone who should not have been there, or he was alone and did not know it. I had heard that kind of laugh once before, from someone crouched beneath a dark tent flap, telling two terrified boys to keep quiet. By morning, I had decided Eli and I would leave. I did not care how rude it seemed. Damien had spent half the night pacing outside our room and speaking to an empty hallway. The stranger from the road was still somewhere in the woods. My childhood had taught me not to ignore the point where a bad feeling becomes a decision. But Rowan asked us to stay until lunch. She said Damien was not usually like this, that he had not slept in days, and that their mother would be furious if guests vanished without explanation. I agreed only because Eli did not want to make things worse for her. We left the lamp on all night. Neither of us slept for more than a few minutes at a time. Every shift of the house made us sit upright, pipes clicking behind the walls, waves breaking far below the cliff, the groan of branches against the roof. Once, just before daylight, we heard the front doorknob turn. It stopped after a single, slow twist. Damien slept late. When he finally came downstairs, he acted as though nothing had happened. He made coffee, asked about breakfast, and even apologized for getting drunk at the bar. For an hour, I almost believed we had misread everything. Then he saw my phone on the kitchen counter. A notification from my coworker flashed across the screen. Damien picked it up before I could stop him. He read it, set it down, and looked at me with a blank expression. "Were you talking about me at work?" he asked. "No. You and Eli were whispering about me last night. We were worried about you." His expression tightened. "That is not the same thing." He walked away, but the house felt different after that. Every room seemed to hold its breath. Rowan avoided eye contact. Eli kept his jacket on. Around sunset, Damien suggested that we go into town for dinner. I told him we were tired and would eat at the house. He smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. "Fine," he said, "stay here." He took Rowan's car and left alone. The moment the engine faded down the road, Eli told me we should book a hotel. I did. The nearest place with rooms was 40 minutes away, and the only available reservation was for later that night. We packed quietly, planning to leave as soon as we could get a taxi or rideshare signal. The problem was the house had poor reception. I stepped onto the back deck, held my phone over the railing, and waited for one bar to appear. That was when I saw movement near the trees. At first I assumed it was a deer. The moon was bright enough to silver the grass, but the woods were still black. Then, a figure stepped out from behind a pine. It was the man from the road. He was no longer wearing the thick coat. His shirt was stained and hanging open. His skin looked gray in the moonlight. He stood beyond the edge of the yard, staring directly at the house. I raised my phone's flashlight without thinking. The beam hit his face. For 1 second, I saw him clearly, cracked lips, hollow cheeks, and eyes that did not blink. He lifted one hand, not in a wave, but in a slow motion that told me he had noticed me. Then he moved backward into the trees and disappeared. I ran inside and locked the deck door. Rowan came upstairs when she heard me. I told her what I saw. She listened without interrupting, then went pale. "There's an old maintenance shed near the road," she said. "My grandfather used it before he died. Damien told me last year that someone had been sleeping in it. Why didn't you tell us?" "Because he said he scared them off." Before I could answer, the lights went out. The whole house dropped into darkness. Eli cursed under his breath. Rowan searched for candles while I checked the doors. The front door was locked. The deck door was locked. The side door near the laundry room was standing open. Cold air moved through the hallway. It carried pine needles and something metallic that made the back of my throat tighten. I knew I had closed it earlier. I remembered checking the lock twice after seeing the man outside, then trying to laugh at myself for doing it. Seeing the door open made the memory feel useless. Locks only matter when everyone outside respects them. We backed into the living room and called Damien, but his phone rang from the kitchen counter. He had left it behind. A sound came from the hallway. Not footsteps. Breathing. Slow, wet breathing. Eli grabbed a fireplace poker. Rowan held a heavy ceramic lamp. I stood near the stairwell with my phone light aimed at the darkness, trying not to remember the hand around my ankle so many years before. Then Damien stepped into the beam. He was soaked from the rain, even though there had been no rain. His hair clung to his face. In one hand, he held a set of keys. In the other, he held the small folding knife I had seen on the road. "You locked me out," he said. "No," Rowan whispered. "You left." Damien looked past us toward the open side door and smiled. "He came back," he said. Something shifted in the darkness behind him. For a moment, none of us moved. Damien stood in the hallway, blocking the only path to the front door. Behind him, the side entrance swung slowly in the wind. I could smell that same rotten odor drifting through the house. Eli raised the fireplace poker. "Move." Damien did not. He looked amused, as though the whole thing was a private joke that only he understood. "I told him you were here," he said. Rowan stared at him. "Who?" Damien's smile faded. The guy in the shed, he listens better than anyone. That was when the stranger appeared behind him. He came through the open door without a sound. He was thinner than I remembered, almost skeletal, and the smell coming from him filled the hallway. One hand held a length of rusted metal. The other was wrapped in dirty cloth. Damien turned, as if expecting him to stop at his side. The man did not stop. He shoved Damien into the wall hard enough to crack a picture frame. Damien screamed. The knife fell from his hand and skidded across the floor. The stranger lunged toward it. Eli moved first. He swung the poker into the man's arm. The metal bar dropped. Rowan pulled me toward the stairs, but Damien was on the floor between us and the exit, clutching his shoulder and shouting that it was not supposed to happen this way. The stranger grabbed the back of his jacket and dragged him toward the open door. I do not know why I followed. Maybe I wanted to see it end. Maybe I was tired of running from the same fear in different shapes. Outside, the yard sloped toward the trees. The stranger pulled Damien across the wet grass. Damien kicked and cursed, then began begging Rowan for help. We ran after them, keeping just far enough away to avoid the swinging metal rod. Near the tree line, the stranger released Damien and pointed toward the old service shed. The door was open. Inside, I saw a pile of blankets, empty cans, stolen bags, and photographs taped across the wall. Some were faded, some were new. In several, strangers were standing outside the coastal house. In two of them, Eli and I were walking on the road the previous night. Then I saw a picture that made my body go cold. It showed a backyard at night. A trampoline stood near the woods. Two small tents were visible beneath patio lights. Childhood home. The photograph was old, the edges curled with age, but there was no mistake. At the bottom, written in black marker, was a date from the summer I was 12. I recognized the crooked garden hose beside the garage, the white cover pulled over the hot tub, even the faint blue stripe on the tent where Owen had spilled a drink before we went to sleep. I could barely breathe. The stranger had not found us by chance. He had been watching houses for years, moving between places, living in sheds, empty cabins, and wooded lots. The cottage was simply another place where he believed no one would see him coming. Damien saw the photos too. His face collapsed. "I didn't know," he said. "I just found him out here. I thought he was harmless." "You brought him food," Rowan said. Damien did not answer. Sirens cut through the trees before he could say anything else. Rowan had managed to send an emergency message when the power first failed, and a patrol car had finally reached the service road. The stranger ran toward the woods, but he was too slow. Officers found him before sunrise, hiding beneath a collapsed dock near the cove. They arrested Damien too. The police found messages on his laptop, photos from the shed, and proof that he had been giving the stranger access to the house while convincing himself he could control him. He had wanted someone loyal, someone he could use to frighten people who embarrassed him. Instead, he had invited a predator into his family's home. The investigation connected the stranger to burglaries and assaults in several states. The detectives told me later that the shed contained maps covered in circles, scraps of mail stolen from houses, and dozens of photographs of yards, windows, and back doors. He did not have to force his way into every place. He watched long enough to learn which doors were left unlocked and which families thought isolation meant privacy. I never learned every detail. I did not want to. What stayed with me was smaller, the opening of a tent zipper, a smell drifting through a dark room, the sound of someone standing outside a door without knocking. People like to say instinct is irrational. I do not believe that anymore. Sometimes, your body understands the danger before your mind can explain it, and sometimes the woods remember you long after you have forgotten them. 3 days after the police took Damien and the man from the shed into custody, Detective Mara Doyle called me. She did not sound dramatic. That made what she said worse. "The photograph from the shed," she began. "The one of your childhood backyard. We need to talk about it." Eli and I drove back to Maine that afternoon. Rowan came with us, but Damien was already being held separately. The police had searched the coastal house, the shed, his phone, his laptop, and the car he had used that night. They found enough evidence to prove that Damien had been feeding information to the stranger for months. Photos of people he disliked, Addresses, screenshots of private conversations, names of women who had rejected him, coworkers who had embarrassed him. He had convinced himself that he was only frightening people, that he was teaching them a lesson. The man in the shed had never understood rules that way. Detective Doyle placed the photograph of my old backyard on the table between us. It was not an old photograph. It looked old because it had been printed on faded paper and left in damp conditions. But forensic testing showed that it had been printed less than a year earlier. The image itself had been scanned from something older, then sent digitally to Damien. He says he did not know where it came from, she said. Damien? I asked. He claims an anonymous account emailed it to him. Along with your name. I felt the room tighten around me. The police had found the message in a hidden folder on Damien's laptop. It had been sent 6 months earlier from an account called Keep Watching 979. There was no message in the email, only the photograph, a map pin for the coastal house, and one sentence. H.E. will remember the tent. I had not told Damien about the tent. I had not told Eli until the night we left the coastal house. The only people who knew every detail were my parents, Owen, Nate, Marcus, and the officers who wrote the report all those years ago. Detective Doyle asked whether my father had ever mentioned the incident after we moved to Texas. I told her no. My father had always treated it like a one-time scare. He told us the police had handled it. He said we had been lucky and that we should not waste our lives being afraid of something that was over. But it had never sounded over when he said it. It sounded rehearsed. The detective turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back in black ink. Most of it had smeared, but one line was still readable. H.E. was not supposed to wake up. I stared at it until the words blurred. He? Eli asked quietly. Ja, nobody answered. Detective Doyle then showed us a second item recovered from the shed, a small metal box filled with newspaper clippings, printed maps, and copied police reports. One of the reports was from Georgia. It was the report my father had filed after the stranger opened our tent, but someone had changed it. The names of the children had been blacked out. The address had been removed. In the corner, written in red pen, was a sentence that made my stomach drop. Family. Relocated before follow-up interview. My father had never told us there was supposed to be a follow-up interview. We had moved to Texas less than 2 months after the incident. I remembered thinking it was because of his new job. I remembered my mother crying while packing boxes. I remembered my father making phone calls late at night with the garage door closed. At the time, I thought adults just had problems they did not explain to kids. Now I understood that secrets can look exactly like normal life when you are young. The man from the shed had finally spoken during questioning. Not much, mostly disconnected phrases and threats. But when Detective Doyle showed him the photograph of our backyard, he looked at it for a long time. Then he said something that changed everything. I never went into that tent. The detective asked him what he meant. He looked directly at her and smiled. There were 2 men in that yard. That night, I called my father. He answered after the 4th ring. I did not explain. I only said, "Dad, who else was there?" For several seconds, I heard nothing but his breathing. Then he said, "You should not have gone back outside." I asked him what he meant. He did not answer. Instead, he gave me the address of a storage unit in Georgia. He told me there was a key inside an envelope in his desk drawer. Then he said something I had never heard him say before. "My real name is not the name you grew up with." The line went silent. When I called back, he did not answer. 2 days later, I flew to Georgia alone. The storage unit was behind an abandoned furniture outlet outside Atlanta. It was the kind of place people used when they wanted to forget something existed. Rows of rusted metal doors, security cameras that looked broken, a gate that opened only after I entered a code written on the envelope my father had left behind. Inside the unit were boxes. Not furniture, not old clothes. Files. Every box was labeled with dates, locations, and names I did not recognize. There were photographs of unfamiliar houses, newspaper articles about missing people, court documents, and folders containing copies of police reports from several states. At the back of the unit was a locked plastic bin. Inside was a cassette recorder, a stack of documents, and a yellow envelope with my name written on it. The handwriting belonged to my father. I sat on the cold concrete floor and opened it. The first thing inside was my birth certificate. The name listed for my father was not the name I knew. My father had been born Daniel Voss. The man I had called Dad for my entire life had legally become David Hale 12 years before I was born. Under the certificate was a newspaper article from 1998. It described the arrest of a man named Everett Rusk, a suspected home invasion offender connected to disappearances across Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. My father, then still Daniel Voss, had been a witness in the case. He had worked security for one of the properties Rusk had targeted. He saw him leaving the house. His testimony helped put him away. Rusk was sentenced to life, but he was not alone. The article mentioned a younger brother named Calvin Rusk. Calvin had never been charged. He disappeared shortly after the trial. I read that name again. The man from the shed had never given police his real name. But in his belongings, officers found an old wallet with a damaged identification card. The name on it was Calvin Rusk. The stranger in Maine had not found us by accident. He had been following my family for years. My father had changed his name after the trial because Calvin had threatened him. He moved away. He built a new life. He married my mother. He had me. And when Calvin found us again in Georgia, my father realized that the past had caught up with him. That was why we moved to Texas so suddenly. That was why he never let us camp outside again. That was why he told the police he had found nothing. He was afraid that the moment Calvin's name appeared in another report, someone connected to Everett would know where we were. At the bottom of the bin was a videotape. I found an old player in the storage office and watched it alone. The recording was from the night of the sleepover. The camera faced our backyard from a hidden angle near the garage. The quality was terrible, but I could see the tents, the hot tub, the dark shape of the trampoline. Then I saw the man. Calvin Rusk was standing near the trees. He was watching the tent. A few seconds later, another man entered the frame. My father. He approached Calvin slowly, holding something in his hand. They argued, but there was no sound on the tape. Calvin pointed toward the tent. My father shook his head. Calvin stepped closer. Then the footage cut out. The next clip began several minutes later. My father was standing alone in the yard. Calvin was gone. The camera angle changed one last time. It showed the side of the house. And then I saw the person who had been standing behind the trash bins. It was not Calvin. It was a woman. She wore a dark hood and kept her face lowered. But when she turned toward the camera, I recognized her immediately. My mother. For years, I believed my father had hidden the truth to protect us from Calvin Rusk. But my mother had been there too. She had not been running away from the yard. They'd been meeting him. The final item in the bin was a recent photograph. It showed my apartment building in Manhattan. The picture had been taken from across the street. In the corner of the image, someone had circled my window in red ink. On the back, there was one sentence. Your father keep the wrong secret. My mother died 3 years ago. But that night, I realized something I had never allowed myself to consider. Maybe she had not been afraid of Calvin Rusk. Maybe she had been protecting him. And maybe the person who sent Damien the photograph was not a stranger at all. Maybe it was someone from my own family. Someone who had been watching long before I ever stepped into that tent.